While the debate over which version of Blade Runner is best will rage on forever, one argument reveals which cut is the best to watch first. Released in 1982, Blade Runner confounded critics and disappointed at the box office. However, in the years that followed, the ambitious sci-fi neo-noir gained a cult following and eventually became recognized as a classic. Like The Shining before it, Blade Runner went on to be considered an uncontested masterpiece, and its harsh original reviews were written off when critics reappraised director Ridley Scott's offbeat adaptation of Philip K. Dick's novel. Since there are numerous different cuts of Blade Runner, the merits of each are still hotly debated. Reviewers might agree that Blade Runner is an essential piece of influential sci-fi cinema, but critics and fans alike still argue over which is the best cut. The Blade Runner director's cut added in new material and excised some elements that the studio initially insisted on including, while the final cut restored the famous unicorn dream sequence in all its glory. Blade Runner's theatrical cut included a voiceover that was jettisoned in subsequent releases, as well as a bizarre studio-mandated ending. Deckard's voiceover makes the original Blade Runner easier to follow. Cutting Blade Runner's voiceover makes the movie trickier for newcomers. While the infamous ending alone ensures it is not the best version, the theatrical cut is the best Blade Runner for new viewers. Deckard's narration explains the movie's knotty plot with far more clarity, allowing casual viewers to understand what is happening without reading Dick's "Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep?" Although Deckard's voiceover might seem redundant upon rewatch, it is essential for understanding the movie's plot as a first-time viewer. Despite the overriding belief that Blade Runner's theatrical cut is not the best version, therefore, it is the best place for a newcomer to start. A lot of the bigger existential questions that Blade Runner asks are less accessible if the viewer doesn't understand what is actually happening in the story. The question of whether Deckard is a replicant like Roy Batty would be immaterial if the viewer didn't realize that Deckard struggled with eliminating the replicants, something that is easier to glean when his voiceover is included. From major plot points to Deckard's internal conflict, a lot of Blade Runner's story is not visually seen on screen. As such, the final cut and director's cut are more ambitious and compelling, but the theatrical cut is a perfect introduction to the movie. The theatrical Blade Runner cut is not the best version of the movie. Blade Runner's narration isn't enough to salvage the theatrical cut. A unicorn appears in a dream from Blade Runner. Easier to follow it might be, but the theatrical cut is still nowhere near as good as the Blade Runner final cut when measured in terms of outright quality. Blade Runner's enigmatic ending is central to the movie's cult status, and a certain level of ambiguity is necessary for the movie to make its larger thematic point about the nature of existence. Blade Runner never explaining whether Deckard is a replicant is a perfect example of leaving a huge plot element up to the viewer in a way that enhances the story. As such, Blade Runner's theatrical cut is only essential viewing for the uninitiated. For everyone else, those already familiar with the world, characters, and basic narrative, Ridley Scott's final cut offers a far richer, more authentic experience enhanced by the extra dose of mystery. The studio meddling is apparent within the theatrical cut, and while helpful for first-timers, the narration becomes detrimental thereafter.